So in the sense of doing YouTube and doing a live stream, I'm now switching over from my slides to a browser and my Windows terminal, my Linux terminal, and we're going to do an installation. And I check in between shortly if there may have already been some questions. No questions so far, that looks good. Yeah, so what I have here basically on the left side of my screen is a very regular normal Kopano installation. So I'm using here, now it's underscore, an installation with Ubuntu 18.04, and that's basically what we have here internally in our test deployments. So we have an automated install process for our software where we can easily choose, hey, I want to install that on Ubuntu, on CentOS, on Red Hat, on SLES, on Debian as well, of course. And then I can select how I want to install the last final version, I want to install the master, and so on and so forth. And what I have prepared here is basically an installation with Ubuntu 18.04. Kopano is already running, so that's not really the topic of our webinar. We want to see how we can integrate Kopano Meet with that. And I'm going to show you now how that can be done. And what I'm doing is I'm also just using copy and paste our own manual, and I want to explain to you bit by bit on what I'm doing and how you can do those steps as well. What's important to know is that we have our own apt repositories for our software. So here on my system I already have a repository configured for Kopano itself and the web app. And I will want to add another repository here, in that case for Meet itself. And since I'm lucky and I'm using the same distribution as it's explained also in the manual, everything that I really just need to do is a copy paste of these lines. And the important thing is basically that you want to, and I'm going to copy paste that one by one to also give you the possibility to modify that a bit. So in the first step, we're just defining the distribution that you have. The thing that you on your system will need to do is this here, this your serial. This is something that you will need to fill out with your own credentials. Since I'm here in the Kopano office, my IP address is whitelisted for that system, so I don't actually need to put in my subscription key. But if you're doing that at home, you will need to do so. And then, yeah, I'm basically just echoing this one line into my sources list. So just to see that that has been done, I'm opening that file as well. And I have a Kopano Meet.list with my sources list. And apart from just adding this line, I also need to import our release key. And this is the next step I'm doing. And then everything I need to do is just do an apt update, which updates my package lists. I have 28 upgraded packages, but for the moment I'm going just to ignore that. Which means I now have everything in place to actually do my Kopano installation. And for Kopano Meet we have a meta package that you can easily use to get in all the packages, or you could still do a manual installation. Which means that you would then need to manually grab all those components, and that's explained here in the next step. So the Kopano meta package, for example, would automatically install our own web server, Kopano KWebD, it would install Kopano Connect, our API, Kopano GRAPI, our API front end, that's then actually called CAPI, and our signaling server, that's the Kopano KWM server, and then of course Meet itself, the Meet web app. And the one thing that the meta package doesn't install automatically, but that's something that you already have on your system anyway, that's of course Kopano server as the last package within the stack that you would need to have installed. So let's do apt install Kopano Meet packages. Yeah, like I said before, so it installs GRAPI, CAPI, Connect, KWeb, our signaling server, and then there are two packages for Kopano Meet. The one is the actual Meet web app, and then a meta package itself, and some package dependencies that are coming from GRAPI. And I'm going to say yes to that, and then it will take a moment until those packages are installed. Yeah, and while we wait, so there is quite an important statement here in the manual, and that's something, well, the wait is already over, but I'm going to explain it nonetheless. Kopano Meet, since it's a bit microservice-y, meaning that there are different services involved, and all these services talk to each other through the means of HTTP, or more specifically HTTPS. And here, for this very same reason, it's quite important that if you configure your web server, that you properly configure your web server, and that you properly configure an SSL certificate for your web server, because those services essentially also need to be able to verify, oh, I'm talking to the right person, I'm talking to the right endpoint, and not to have basically a man in the middle in your installation. So it's quite important that you have a correct web server application. And since we know how important and how difficult sometimes that is to get your web server configuration right, we actually came up with this Kopano KWebD, our own web server, which pulls in a quite popular Go-based web server, but automatically provides all the configuration that we need for our own services. And on top of that, of course, not only provides its own configuration, but is able to, with just the specification of your hostname and your email address, to also automatically retrieve certificates from Let's Encrypt, which will then be both from our services and from your users be automatically recognized as valid and secure certificates and connections. So we have Kopano Meet now installed. The next step, like I already have highlighted, is the installation. I'm going to come back to the question later, but that also reminds me that I should quickly mute my MetaMouse. Sorry about that. Kopano Meet configuration. So from our side, recommended web server is Kopano Web. You can, of course, and that's also here in the documentation, configure a third-party or a different third-party, sounds weird, a different web server, like for example Nginx or even Apache. For the moment, we have example configuration for Nginx already ready and done here, and we're going to add Apache configuration once someone is really there and asking about that as well. So let's head over to the configuration file of Kopano Web. d.cfg. Of course not cd, but vi. And here, in a normal installation, we need to basically configure two things. And since I'm here in a dedicated testing environment, I still need to configure two other steps. But first, for the general things that everyone needs to configure, and that's basically here the first configuration setting called hostname, where you need to specify, and that's again very important for the SSL certificate generation, you need to specify the host name over which you are going to reach your service. And why does Kopano Web need to know the host name? Basically because it needs to obtain an SSL certificate for that. So in my case, that's Felix Meet Webinar. And usually you would also need to specify here the TLS ACME email. This is something that I'm going to leave out in my installation because my test environment is not publicly accessible. Therefore, it cannot talk to Let's Encrypt and get an SSL certificate from there. So I'm going to leave that commented here in my scenario. But usually in your setup, you will want to uncomment that and put in essentially any valid email address, and it needs to be valid, for example, because Let's Encrypt also sends you reminders if your certificate is going to expire soon. And in my special test environment, again, I'm also going to uncomment here those HTTPS and HTTP ports. And since again I have a bit of an extra use case and I still want to have SSL configured configuration, but I cannot get that from Let's Encrypt, I'm going to specify an SSL certificate that I already have on that system, and I'm going to quickly get that from my Nginx configuration. So once the server PAM and also the SSL key. Okay, and that was already everything I need to configure here in my case in Kopano Meet. So I can just exit that configuration file. And I could now enable Kopano KWebD and restart that. I'm just going to show that, and then I can do status, and which would basically say that you get this fail to reset devices list. This can be ignored. No, but he's not yet listening on the right port. Let's properly stop that once and start again. I did the very important mistake. I'm currently having Nginx running, and that is of course listening on my port 80 and 443, and therefore my Kopano KWebD will not start. But now we can see it started up. It's listening on that port. It doesn't give any additional port address, which means if I now would load this here, so it says not found because there is nothing on the root, but that not found error message is already coming from my Kopano Meet server. So that's like the first step of things that you need to have configured. And skipping over Nginx part and coming over to the rest of the components that you need to configure for your Kopano Meet. So it's already there, but it's not yet working, which means if I now would go to Meet, it would load, but it would, so Kopano Meet uses a dedicated service for authentication, which is our Kopano Connect. and this is where he now is trying to redirect me to. But since that's still configured that it's using localhost, that will fail. So we need to do some more configuration before we can finally use Kopano Meet. And that is something, basically what you have to do here is in that section called Kopano configuration. And I need to make that table a bit wider, since that does not properly generate line breaks, just to show you how that table is built and structured. So we have here a list of configuration options that you will find in our configuration file. And then here in the table you can see where can you find that option and to which value do you need to set it. And we're starting here at the last section in the server CFG, which is from our Kopano server. Here we need to set Enable Sso. We need to enable that because what that configuration basically does is saying to Kopano server, hey, if someone now comes in with an OpenID token that is generated from our OpenID provider Kopano Connect, then make sure to pass this token, and if that token is still valid, let that user please in. And since the Kopano server needs to know the address of Kopano Connect, our OpenID issuer in that lingo, in that slang, we need to configure that in Kopano server as well. So I'm going over to etc Kopano, and then I'm just going into my server CFG and enable SSO, commenting that in, and yeah, where's my mouse pointer? There it is. Putting this to yes, and then we have our OIDC issuer. Going to comment that in as well, and that issuer is basically my host name from before, including the HTTPS now. So within Kopano Web, you just specified the host name. And here inside all the other services, you always need to specify the fully qualified domain name, and that's quite important. So I've talked about that, so you may have missed that while I was typing it, but you always need to remove that last slash basically. And as you can see here, it's also highlighted in the documentation, always without the trailing slash. And since again, it's a bit special here in my environment, since with the SSL certificate, since that SSL certificate is trusted by my browser, but the CA, the certificate authority, is not imported on that system. I'm also setting here in that environment the option to run in an insecure mode, which means that Kopano server and all the other components where I'm now configuring this will not say, oh, I've received an SSL certificate, but that SSL certificate, I don't know the certificate authority to that, therefore I don't know if that's really, I don't know the certificate authority, therefore for me that certificate is not valid. And therefore in my lab environment here, I'm going to run all those services unsecure, which means they will not bail out if they see an untrusted certificate. So that was step number one, Kopano server. Now we want to configure so we're going to continue forwards from the table. We have managed our Kopano server CFG. Now we're going to do the same with the Kopano web meeting server, our signaling server. kvm server.cfg, serverd.cfg. And here again, it's the same, that we need to put in that issuer. I still have that in my copy buffer, and I need to, in my special environment, you shouldn't do that, of course, in your production environment where we have a system that is publicly accessible, or where you have a bought certificate from a known and trusted certificate authority, there you shouldn't run that in insecure mode. Here in my test environment, I have to. And yeah, that's basically what I need to configure here. In your other environments, and this is here, turn URIs, turn server shared secret, and there is also the turn service URL, which points to what the Kopano turn server, the provided turn server, which means that if you want to then actually do calls out of your own network environment, you will also want to configure here your turn service. But I'm going to skip that here in our demo case. Next step on the configuration route is Kopano Connect. Like I said, Kopano Connect is our OpenID provider, is basically the one component that is driving authentication in our new web stack. And Kopano Connect also needs to know the URL which is it is working with to have proper callback URLs for authentication. Now I've copy pasted too much. Let's quickly head out and back in and copy that URL new. There's my pointer. So here also my host name, again without that trailing slash. And I'm going to put this also in insecure mode. Okay. And for the last and final service configuration file that I need to touch, this is then our Kopano copy. Which is the forefront to our REST API, and that also needs to know its authentication source, needs to know where the OpenID provider is living. So let's put the URL in here as well. And also this one has this setting for insecure, which I need to set. Okay, and then for the final copy-paste block, I'm going to enable all those services now, and I'm going to restart or start initially Kopano Connect and copy and Grapi and KWM server, and I'm going to restart Kopano servers. And if everything is right, that last restart took a bit longer. I should now be able to get log files from Kopano server. Okay, and it needs to be this way around. Oh, there is still something inside of Kopano server, and I think I already know what it is. Let's stop Kopano server and Kopano Connect, and then start first connect and then the server. Yeah, and that looks already way better. Okay, which means Kopano server is now configured. I can go to the URL I have configured and I just add /meet to it. And then I now, instead of being redirected to this local host URL, I'm now properly redirected to my OpenID provider. Let's change the layout of the windows a bit. Then I can just log in with any user that is known to my Kopano server. And then, yeah, Kopano server will ask, hey, oh, not Kopano server, Meet will ask to use the microphone and camera. And then, hello, that's the second webcam here on my system. Meet is installed and configured. Yeah. And here in the top border, you see a connection failure for KWM server. I think we just need to give this one more kick. So I've seen that in my test installation as well, that on the first start, the KWM server, I think it's with the package installation already running, and therefore it's a simple start will not properly configure that. So I'm going to stop that and then start it again. And then should any moment now that red connection window should also disappear. Let's reload. Yeah, and it's gone. Okay. To recap on that, you have now seen how you can install Kopano Meet. And yeah, if you want to learn further, so the one document I've used for that is on documentation kopano.io/kopano_meet_manual. But you can just as well just go to the our documentation portal, and then just either here from the list of individual manuals in the middle or on the sidebar, just choose Kopano Meet. And what you can also use, we had a webinar and also a small blog series about Docker. So there's also this Kopano-Docker project that also already brings Kopano Meet with it, and also a Meet that is configured for guest users out of the box. Which brings us now to the question round, and I already got one question forwarded from Jörg. Will the license of Meet be included in the Kopano serial? And that's actually not such an easy answer. So in the past we had different subscriptions, or we still have different subscription: Basic, Pro, and Enterprise. And the way that it's at the moment, or this is something, at least how we have discussed it so far, is that Kopano Meet will still be part of the professional subscription, but, and that's the nice thing about Meet, Meet will also be able to run completely standalone without any Kopano subscription. And for that, yeah, I just get the hint. It's not in Basic, so that's maybe something I wasn't entirely clear with. It's included in Pro and Enterprise, but not included in the Basic subscription. Yeah, and we're still a bit on finding the right price, finding the right price model to have, yeah, a standalone Kopano subscription for Meet. Yeah, I read now that there have been no other questions so far, which I rate as a good sign. Yeah, thanks for your attention. I hope you like this new format with the webinar through YouTube Live. And we're going to experiment with that a bit more to give this also a bit more fancy graphics and some other transitions. But I think it went quite good for a first real try, first external tryout. And yeah, if you have any feedback or questions, yeah, be sure to reach out to us at feedback@kopano.io, for example, or the already known email addresses for our sales and support.